Closed captioning of this program is made possible by the Fireman's Fund Foundation.
First Lady Michelle Obama and the GOP presidential frontrunners swing through California to collect campaign cash. Meanwhile, former California Democratic campaign treasurer Kendi Durkee pleads guilty to fraud. The jobs bill, intended to stimulate employment by making financing easier for startups, is headed to the president's desk after rare bipartisan approval in Congress. Is the Affordable Care Act in critical condition? The U.S. Supreme Court took a secret vote today. Plus, a unique health clinic in San Francisco that's already reforming care for low-income patients.
There's a documented shortage of primary care doctors in this country right now. Nurse practitioners, however, are growing in numbers, and it is a group of people who are very attracted to this type of work.
Coming up next. Good evening, I'm Belva Davis, and welcome to This Week in Northern California. Joining me tonight on our news panel from Los Angeles, David Lazarus, business columnist for the Los Angeles Times and KTLA Television. Here in studio with me, Michelle Quinn, Silicon Valley reporter for Politico, and Carla Marinucci, San Francisco Chronicle's senior political reporter. So Carla, tell me, does the fact that all of the Republican almost all of them, candidates for president are here, signal that California really will make a difference in this primary coming up?
California is the mother lode, not only political donations, but of delegates, 172 big ones in this race. And that is what brought Mitt Romney here in the last week, Rick Santorum here, Ron Paul coming here next week. As long as this contest goes on, as long as it's so contentious, more and more the possibility becomes that California could be the one that puts Romney over the top, and it's looking like that's what's going to happen. Romney's amassing all kinds of big endorsements. He got Kevin McCarthy this week, the GOP whip, Carly Fiorina, Meg Whitman gave him a big fundraiser in Redwood City. I mean, it looks to be going his way, but I tell you, I also was there at the Jelly Belly factory in Fairfield, where Rick Santorum looked very defiant this week, channeling Ronald Reagan, surrounded by hundreds of conservatives and said, I am not giving up. We're taking this all the way to the convention floor. He seems pretty adamant about that. Whether or not that's going to happen, it's certainly, California is the place where they've got to pick up the campaign money, and they're looking for a share of those 172 delegates because it's by congressional district, winner take all by congressional district.
Well, they're dividing their time, though, between here and Los Angeles. And David, you have a question down here.
Yeah, Carla, I mean, I know why the Republican candidates are coming here, because there's a big pile of money waiting for them. But what do California Republicans want in return? Do they have a wish list that they're hoping to send to Washington?
Well, you know, California Republicans, David, I mean, this is one of the things we saw this week. The California Republican Party is in flux, and we saw that with the defection of Nathan Fletcher this week, the San Diego mayoral candidate, one of the party's rising stars, a California assemblyman who defected this week and said he's going to be an independent. That's a blow to the party. That just shows what do Republicans want. It's pretty unclear right now. They're down 13 points in registration to the Democrats. At this point, the party needs money, it needs bodies, and yet it is losing some of its brightest stars, like Nathan Fletcher. That leaves the Republican Party's future in California, I think, in doubt.
Well, I'm really surprised about this because the whole idea of open primary was to make both parties more moderate. and yet that's not what's happening.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're right, Michelle. This is I think the concern among moderates and those who hope to see the Republican Party rebound. The Republican primary in June will only be open to Republican registered voters, not to independent voters, unlike the Democratic primary. That means the more conservative factions in that party are going to be voting for president. And that's where Rick Santorum, Ron Paul may have a chance to pick up some of those delegates that might go to Romney. We'll have to see about that. But the fact is, the whole profile of the Republican Party and the activist base is more and more conservative in California.
David?
Carla, you said that you were at the Jelly Belly factory with Santorum earlier when he was there, and he was certainly touting his conservative bona fides when he was there. Is that really resonating here in the Golden State? Do Republicans here think that he is the conservative messiah, or are they having their doubts?
Well, the latest poll, and we tried to ask David Santorum this question, the latest poll shows him down 20 points to Mitt Romney in California. But the fact is, it's very clear Romney does not have the passion of a lot of these Republican voters. We saw it in talking to the people there who showed up at the Jelly Belly factory. We've seen it for months now. More and more, Romney has been defined himself as a wealthy candidate. This week, it came out the plans for the expansion of his $10 million La Jolla beachfront house, which includes elevators for the cars. I mean, this is the kind of thing that a Republican candidate has to worry about.
And the whole Etch-a-Sketch.
You say that as if the rest of the 99% doesn't have that. What?
And Michelle just raised the Etch-a-Sketch,
which is
the Etch-a-Sketch issue for Mitt Romney, which is the nightmare branding of this candidate. Santorum this week held up the Etch-a-Sketch to great applause at his rally.
For people who don't know, one of his Romney's aides said that after the end of the primaries, you shake the campaign and then you start anew, making people think that he's not a real substantive person.
And this is becoming the brand for Mitt Romney. It's one of the reasons why he's going to continue to have challenges here. Will he get the lion's share of the delegates in California? It's expected that he will, no question about it. The fact is that Etch-a-Sketch image is going to be used by other Republicans and Democrats as he goes forward. That's his problem.
But one thing I wonder about it is during Obama's primary race with Clinton, the argument is that she made him better. And what I want to know is, do you think that Santorum or Newt Gingrich, are they making Romney better?
I think there's no question from the 2008 race when Romney only won 4 congressional districts in California. You can say Romney is a much better candidate than he was the last time around.
Let's move to a Democratic issue, and we talked about that at the beginning. We have a confession in terms of mishandling campaign funds. Explain a bit.
We have to mention the case of Kendi Durkee, which is being described as the largest political embezzlement case in history. She pled guilty this week to 5 charges of mail fraud. The FBI has been after her. This is a woman who managed as a campaign treasurer dozens of prominent campaigns, including Dianne Feinstein, who's estimated to lost $5 million in the embezzlement. Why this went on for years, I think it's still a mystery. We did a story back in 2004 that linked Kendi Durkee to a phony campaign committee for Barack Obama. It was unauthorized. She was raising money, and yet it took this long. It's a sad case. A lot of campaigns have been wiped out, and Feinstein is, of course, suing Kendi Durkee still, but the fact is we saw some kind of closure. We have yet to see what kind of sentence she's going to get in this case.
Well, we had a little miracle of another kind in Washington, D.C., where a bill called the Jobs Bill actually passed with bipartisan support. What happened, and what is this bill?
Well, it is a bill that's going to Obama's desk, we think as early as this week, and it basically relaxes regulation so that startups can get more money, or money earlier in their growth. There's 6 parts of this bill, and Obama came up with some of the ideas in the State of the Union. Eric Cantor grabbed 6 bills in the House and called it the Jobs Act, and the Senate passed it last week, and now it's going to Obama. And it is a miracle. I think it's because of the time in our country. There's still an issue about the unemployment. And if you can pass something that doesn't cost the government any money, like, it's not like using TARP money. It's just tweaking the regulations of the securities regulations so that more money can go to startups.
Michelle, you mentioned startups. That's the focus of this, and of course, Silicon Valley. This is ground zero for startups.
Exactly.
But one of the concerns about this bill was that it might open the door to fraud. That by relaxing the regulations, allowing people to come in on startups, that it could open the door to hucksters raising money on the internet and so forth. What's the controls on that?
Well, it's a great point. And the thing that was sort of amazing was that just a few days before the Senate voted, Mary Shapiro, who's the SEC chairwoman, wrote a letter to the Senate saying, don't do this. Don't do this, and here's all the reasons why you shouldn't do this. And they went ahead and did it. And her concern was there's not sufficient controls. There's one aspect that was subbed out the last moment that has controls. And it's this idea of crowdfunding, where you come up with an idea and you put a sign up on the internet saying, everybody send me money for my idea, and you'll all get a stake in my business. Before this bill, you weren't allowed to do that, and now you can. So the idea is that lots and lots of seeds will be fostered.
Or David knows a little bit about seeds that are planted sometimes that aren't fruitful. Why don't you tell us a little bit about this jobs bill from your point of view?
Yeah.
Well, Michelle, I mean, I've got a question. When we say startup, we think Facebook, Twitter, or God forbid, pets.com. But, Silicon Valley isn't really hurting for money, and good ideas tend to have to fend off the venture capitalists. So is this Jobs Act primarily targeted at tech or biotech or biopharmaceuticals, or is this something that's going to be going towards construction, startups, food, restaurants, cafes? I mean, where are we going to see the money going?
A really good question. I mean, I think that one aspect, this crowdfunding, is going to be, you'll see it all over the U.S. It's going to be anybody who can think of an idea, use the power of the internet and social media, and get people to, invest. So that's a broad one. The one other aspect is the whole IPO on-ramp, and that directly hits Silicon Valley, which is if you can get companies going public earlier than they would have, or make it easier, then they would. Then the idea is that they'll create more jobs. That most of the job growth.
Michelle, you should tell people what crowdfunding is, because this is a really interesting idea.
Well, this is the idea of you put a poster, you put something up on the internet, and you say, everybody give me $10 and I will start the newest Pez dispenser business. Yeah. And everybody does, and everybody gets a stake in it. So if I go public, all my shareholders will get money. That is not legal today. This bill will make it legal. And there will be the changes that they made in the bill the last minute would mean that there's brokers who facilitate these trades, and they're SEC regulated. So I might start a matchmaking website, and so that's one aspect, and that could have a great effect across the country. Probably not as much here for what David said, which is it's really about we have money here for those. Tech startups.
Who's going to oversee this? I mean, this seems like an invitation.
Well, the SEC apparently this week said, we need a lot more time than's given. Once Obama signs this, we need more than 90 days to make this happen. This is massive changes. So I don't know. It's going to fall on the SEC, and
we already know they're sort of overburdened.
Right. Exactly.
Anyway. So at this point.
Any estimates of how many jobs might come out of this?
No, there's none. So the question is, what's the accountability on this? There's just a general sense that, well, yeah, there'll be more fraud, but there's always more fraud when you tweak regulations. And there's a sense there'll be more jobs, and I don't know, I assume that people will measure it.
This got more support from Republicans than Democrats?
Republicans almost unilaterally supported it. Democrats were a bit of the holdout near the end. But the problem was that Obama had already signaled that he was going for it, and so too did the party.
Okay, so we turn then to another topic, and that is what was going on in Washington all week, one of the longest hearings before the Supreme Court in a long time. David Lazarus, tell us what was the temperature of the justices as they heard all the arguments on affordable care.
It was hot, Belva, and as you mentioned earlier, the fate of health care reform is largely sealed at this point because a secret vote was taken just hours ago. We won't know how they voted till probably late June, but the die has been largely cast. Now, this week was really interesting. I mean, last Friday we were kind of setting it up. Let's look at what happened. We had expected there to be a lot of questions about the mandate, this idea that everyone had to buy health insurance to make the rest of this thing work. What we weren't expecting was how aggressive the conservative justices would be in questioning this, specifically Justice Anthony Kennedy, who was looked at as the swing vote here. Many had thought that he would kind of go along with the mandate. There's enough precedents out there to give you a legal footing for it. But no, he really came on strong and suggested that he didn't like the cut of the mandate's jib, constitutionally speaking. And then the next day, the conservative justices piled on once again and suggested that if the mandate falls, the entire reform bill or law falls with it. It was Antonin Scalia who said, this mandate is the heart of the law. You cut out the heart, and this entire law dies. And that's kind of where the betting line is right now.
David, this is Carla Marinucci. I think one of the mysteries, maybe for those of us outside the legal community, is that the stakes were so high politically on this for the Obama administration, and yet the performance of the Solicitor General making the case was just panned. How did that happen? How did he do so poorly? Were they not prepared? I've even heard some conspiracy theories suggest that this is how the Obama administration wants it, because politically it may work for them if this whole law goes down, that it'll fire up the base, etc. I mean, explain why the Solicitor General apparently did so poorly.
Carla, I think, first of all, the early pans on this man are perhaps unwarranted. Now, it wasn't a passionate defense of health care reform. That's true, but you got to remember who the audience here is. It's not you and me. It's not everybody watching at home. It is the 9 justices of the Supreme Court, specifically the conservatives, because they know that they've got the 4 Democratic appointees locked in. And then when it comes down to the conservatives, it's really only a handful. It's Kennedy, it's Roberts, it's Scalia, those who they're playing to, and they're trying to keep it a muted defense. They're trying to keep it very jurisprudence-oriented so that people would feel that this wasn't some sort of political maneuver being forced down the justices' throats. So I think in that sense it was a fair defense of the law. But I think you're right also. There were a lot of pluses to this law that didn't really come out as they tried to woo Kennedy over with a lot of talks about liberty and whatnot. Now let's look at the politics of this going forward. Let's say the mandate gets shot down. Let's say the entire law gets shot down as a result. Well, for the Republicans, this is huge. They're then able to turn to the electorate and say, we are the last bulwark against big government. We are the last bulwark against President Obama overreaching. Points for us, milk and cookies for everybody. Now, the president is left with precious little at this point. All the president can do is say, well, if you vote for me, maybe I can have more Democratic appointees on the court, but he doesn't really have a lot to salvage.
So, David, were there any friendly questioners, in your opinion?
Oh, absolutely. The 4 progressive justices, Sotomayor, Kagan, Ginsburg, they were all very friendly to it, and they in fact tried to help along the argument as best they could, especially when we saw the question about Medicaid and whether the federal government should almost exclusively pay for a huge expansion of Medicaid to get more low-income people into the insurance fold. And more than half of the people who are uninsured right now, if this law is to work, would come in through Medicaid. Well, some of these justices said, this is a gift. What's anybody complaining about? But the conservatives thought, no, it does sound a little bit like federal coercion, and they sided with the lawyer who's representing the 26 Republican-led states.
David, this is Michelle. What happens if just the mandate goes? How does Obama do in that situation? Does that help him? And does that, going to Carla's conspiracy theory, maybe that kind of galvanizes the base to say, don't take our health care reform away?
Okay, but you got a couple of things going on here. If we lose the mandate, in a best case scenario, we also lose the provision that requires insurers to give coverage to anybody regardless of medical condition. Because without the mandate, it's not economically feasible to have that provision. Rates would go through the roof. So if we just lost that, but we were still able to keep things like young people staying on their parents' plans till they're 26, for example, or filling in the so-called donut hole for Medicare drug prescriptions, then okay, then there's still stuff that you can pat yourself on the back about if you are a Democrat. But the way the wind was blowing in the hearings this week, it suggested that if you lose the mandate, the entire bill goes down with it. And basically the justices are saying, well, just back to the drawing board. I'll tell you, that's not going to happen. Look, the last time we had a run at health care reform in this country was nearly 20 years ago when the Clintons tried it. It took us almost 20 years to get back to this point, and if it gets shot down again, it's going to be hard to imagine the Democrats rising to the challenge again anytime soon. This could be the last shot at health care reform in the lifetimes of many Americans.
Well, quickly, what would happen if it does fail? What are the ramifications?
Back to status quo, unfortunately, and that means rising rates. It means people with pre-existing medical conditions cannot get coverage in the individual insurance market. And most importantly, it means the 50 million people in this country who do not have insurance right now have no inroad to getting it, at least in the short term.
Well, thank you, David. We really appreciate your joining us here tonight. And with the future of health care reform uncertain, the question remains, what tangible solution exists to reduce the skyrocketing cost of medical care? One San Francisco community health director is gaining recognition for a unique approach to providing affordable care at a time when the state of California needs all the options that it can get. It's been 2 years since President Obama signed the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act.
It'll take 4 years to implement fully many of these reforms, but a host of desperately needed reforms will take effect right away.
California officials did act right away on insurance reform, passing legislation to establish a health benefit exchange, guaranteeing coverage for children with pre-existing conditions, and expanding Medi-Cal through new low-income health plans. If the Supreme Court declares the individual insurance mandate constitutional, then the next phase of federal reform rolls out in 2014. In California, an estimated 6.9 million previously uninsured will flood the primary health care system.
California is facing an enormous challenge with healthcare reform, and it's a challenge we should be excited about because we have chosen to bring about 7 million people into care. However, it's very clear that the current models of care cannot accommodate that many more people.
Long before the current debate on health care reform, UCSF nursing professor Pat Dennehy was working on an innovative solution to the rising cost of quality health care and the challenge of bringing it to the chronically uninsured.
There's a documented shortage of primary care doctors in this country right now. And even the projections are that we're not going to see this shortage solved. Nurse practitioners, however, are growing in numbers, and it is a group of people who are very attracted to this type of work. We're health educators as well as healthcare providers. This is what we do well.
Good morning, this is Fina calling from Glide Health Services. Just go to remind of your appointment.
Glide Health Services is a nurse-managed health center in the Tenderloin of San Francisco.
Mr. Warrior?
At our clinic, 90% of the care is rendered by advanced practice nurses.
I'm going to do your blood sugar.
Our patient population are people who have no insurance, people who are underinsured, those folks who would have no other way to receive health care services.
A lot of men, when they're not working, struggle with mood issues, including depression.
I used to be in a shelter because I doesn't have an income right now. So having come to Glide, it makes me more positive to see that they have so many people willing for outreach to you.
All low-fat diet, right?
Okay, perfect.
We provide primary care, urgent care, mental health services, recovery services, chronic disease management, and HIV prevention services. And also, we are a huge training center. We have a direct link to the advanced practice programs at the University of California. We are interdisciplinary as well. The only difference is that the nursing element is running the practice in our case.
Currently, there are about 250 nurse-managed clinics across the country. Glide is the largest on the West Coast. But even as this center continues to expand its services, funding for the future remains a constant concern.
We only have 28% of our population in insurance right now. The rest of the care is floated through a lot of creative funding.
Though nurse practitioners at Glide can diagnose illnesses, prescribe medicine, and perform other functions similar to doctors, many insurance plans refuse to recognize them as primary care providers.
Currently, there are many plans that will not list us as providers. This happened in Massachusetts. When Massachusetts passed health care reform years ago, they were unprepared for the numbers of people who came onto the insurance rolls. And they had to quickly look and find competent, trained people. I would like to suggest, along with my colleagues in the state, that we would like to change some of these rules in anticipation of our needs in California before we open the rolls and find there is no place to put people.
Well, that story was produced in association with the James Irvine Foundation. And that's all for tonight. I want to thank both of you for joining us here tonight. So please visit kqed.org/thisweek for our show archives and to subscribe to our newsletter and our podcast and to share your thoughts about the program. I'm Belva Davis. Thank you so much for watching. Good night.